So you mentioned in your email that your portrait sketches look a little bit cartoon-like with not as much depth as you would like. There are a number of reasons that that's happening. You listed proportion as a possibility, and that is one of them. It's the one I'm going to address first because we want to work on our drawings in the successive stages that I present in my mini course, which I've added to everyone's dashboard for the sake of convenience and so that I can refer to it. If we look at the order of the drawing stages in that mini course, you'll see that it's proportion and shape first. Those are the first two stages. They're interchangeable because they're so inextricably linked, and which one you use first really depends on the subject. So after that, we have another third block-in stage, the advanced block-in stage, and only after that do we finally get into values, shading, edges, and all of that fun stuff. I do want to work on values with you as well, but there's not much point doing that before working on proportions because no amount of shading, no matter how beautiful, will fix awkward-looking proportions. Excellent shading on top of awkward proportions will still look awkward, a little bit like a realistic caricature. Now, many of the shapes and proportions that you have here are close to what they should be. One of the challenges of portrait drawing is that it's just not very forgiving when it comes to proportions. An example I like to use is this. If we adjust the proportions of this flower by making only the width narrower, considerably narrower, this drawing still looks very convincing and realistic, even though its proportions don't represent the specific flower that was observed and being drawn. However, even slightly inaccurate proportions in a portrait drawing can quickly turn it into a caricature, especially since faces are so familiar to us. Even if we don't know what's wrong, we can usually tell that something looks off. All that to say, you're doing very well and are well on your way with your drawings. Portraits are a really challenging subject matter, and I'm going to be really picky throughout this video, pointing out small details so that we can train your eye to see proportions and shapes even better than you are now. I'm also going to be adding a course on accuracy, proportions, and measurement to everyone's dashboard over the next couple of months, and I recommend that you practice the exercises that will be included there. Let's jump into proportions and measuring in this portrait. I'm going to be explaining and using mostly the techniques of comparative measurement, angling, and maybe negative space throughout this video. When using comparative measurement, we pick a base unit to compare the other dimensions in our drawing to. I always recommend starting using comparative measurement by looking for proportions that are similar or equal, and then checking if that's actually so. For example, we can think of the face as being approximately divided into thirds. The forehead area, nose area, and chin area are somewhat similar in height. We can measure to see how similar these thirds are in height on the subject first, and then check to see if you've drawn those proportions correctly. I can start by comparing this dimension to this dimension. This first dimension is the forehead from the hairline to the eyebrow, and the second dimension is the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose. We need to measure from very specific points in order for this to be accurate and to make it an easier process for us. For example, the hairline here is pretty clear. I'll measure from this hairline, and I'm going to imagine that there's a line at the top of the eyebrows connecting them. There's my first measurement. We will call this dimension A. Now, if I move that measurement down to where dimension A ends, I can immediately see that dimension B is longer. Knowing this, I can check if that's the case on the drawing. I measure from the hairline to the top of the eyebrow, and then drag that measurement down. As I do that, I'm noticing that you don't quite have that straight line at the hairline that exists on the reference. This line doesn't raise up quite this much. It's very subtle. I would adjust this hairline to something a little bit more like this. So, I take a measurement from the hairline to the top of the eyebrow, move it down so that it starts at the top of the eyebrow, and we can see that the nose is a little bit too long. This shadow can start higher, approximately here. Moving the shadow up will raise the nostrils too, and that will make a significant difference to the likeness of your drawing. That's the first adjustment that I would make. I'm obviously doing this digitally, so how would you do this without this fabulously useful computer program? First, you'll need a measuring device. It can be your pencil, a knitting needle, a barbecue skewer works really well, anything that's thin and not going to bend. Extend your arm so that your elbow is straight. Look through one eye, close the other one, and measure your first dimension, so the hairline to the top of the eyebrow. Make sure that you measure seated from the same spot every time and avoid bending your elbow, as that would really skew your results. I like to hold my elbow with my other hand to make sure it stays straight. Mark the bottom of the dimension with your finger, then move it down to compare it to this dimension. You can see that my finger's blocking some of the information that I need to see. I can't tell where the shadow on the nose is, so I can either move my finger to the right or left, or I can measure from the eyebrow to the bottom of the shadow first, dimension B, compare it to the forehead, and look to see how much smaller the forehead is.